let's take a deep dive into the humble BSA bottom bracket. Let's work out why people love this revered bottom bracket and should we be more careful what we wish for. Let's get into it. Here it is in the modern day BSA bottom bracket. BSA stands for Birmingham Small Arms. It was a company that started here in the UK, in Birmingham, making, well, small arms. Probably more famous for making motorbikes, but also did a whole bunch of bicycles, as well as some really cool like military type folding bikes and all sorts of stuff. The big thing about BSA and what made it so popular, because at the time there was really only two standards. There was BSA and Italian, and that was pretty much it. And BSA kind of won out because of one key feature, and that is that the drive side was reverse threaded. And this is the real key thing about BSA, and it's key to its success. So I've got here a BSA bottom bracket that's just what you'd push into a press fit one to fix it, if you like. What you'd have is your crank is going to be rotating in a pedaling direction, i.e. clockwise. And I've got this cool graphic up to show you, but that means that the ball bearings are going to be rotating anti-clockwise, which means that the force exerted on the outer bearing, and therefore this thread, is going to be in an anti-clockwise direction, which means that as you pedal, the natural force is to self-tighten the threads into the bottom bracket shell. So it gets tighter and tighter, which means they can't come undone. Unless, and we have seen this loads on Instagram, you'll find that mountain biker out there whose bearings are absolutely sea solid. They've just gone rusty and they try to pedal, and instead of self-tightening, the threads undo. And as they undo, the bottom bracket gets wider because you're obviously unthreading it, and then everything just seizes up and you're in a right pickle. So BSA works great so long as you keep all of your bearings nicely lubricated and moving. Now, the more recent history of BSA bottom brackets, before we go too far back and we talk to cup and cone, is probably most of us still remember this. In fact, these are still fitted to an awful lot of bikes these days. This is a square taper bottom bracket. This is a cartridge type, so you see the bearings are here. And the genius of this was that the one side was held completely captive. So you got this alignment is already sorted for you. Then you have this little centering cone, essentially the threads on the non-drive side, and that keeps everything perfectly aligned. In fact, track cyclists love this because they get a lovely free rotating and easy to service bottom bracket. But you do have to use a tool, a bit like this, to remove it. So there's tool number one. Well, in fact, if you have a Campagnolo version, that is tool number two. They used a hook type design. These were horrific. If these ever got seized up, they were terrifying to try and use. Campagnolo then went back and fixed it and came up with another tool for using their bottom brackets, and that looks a bit like that. A little bit less terrifying, but still not an awful lot of purchase. And you can see why this probably died out. And then the next thing that really came along, probably in the mid-80s, was mountain bikes. This is a pretty good example. This isn't from the 80s, this is probably from the early 2000s. But this is where we started to want wider tyres, and something had to happen to make that happen. So they started to put in a 73mm shell. So before that, road bikes, city bikes, everything had a 68mm shell. And when we wanted wider tyres and a more durable bike, they added 5mm to that to give us the 73mm shell. And it pretty much stayed like that for a long time. When fat bikes became a thing, a couple of varieties came out for fat bikes, but pretty much we're at 68 for road and gravel, weirdly, and 73 for mountain bikes. Although I am strongly of the opinion now that gravel bikes should probably move to a 73mm shell. Now, the reason for that is all about where your chainstay is attached. If you imagine this is your bottom bracket, not just an insert, and you need to weld on your chainstays and your seat post to this bottom bracket shell. And having that extra 5mm gave us so much more space in order to weld that tube on, but also bow it out and allow for your extra wide tyres without the chainstays getting really, really long. Because if you want to try and get a 2-inch wide tyre in there, you're going to have to build the triangle of your chainstays out further to try and get that tyre in. So having the extra width meant that we could move the tyre closer to the bottom bracket. Now, over the years, everything has got wider. We are now talking 32, 34mm road bike tyres, trying to fit that onto a 68mm shell. That's getting trickier and trickier to achieve. And then on gravel bikes, we're trying to get 50mm wide tyres attached to a bottom bracket that's only 68mm wide. So we're coming up with some really funky designs to make that happen. And mountain biking, just as bad. We're going to 2.6, 2.8 inch tyres, trying to attach that to a 73mm bottom bracket shell. So there we are. As we head into this modern era of cycling, our demand for wider and wider tyres without our chainstays getting horrifically long, there is definitely a need for us to have a better bottom bracket solution. other than the 68 and 73 millimeter shells that we're used to. Now recently you might have noticed a massive resurgence in bottom brackets, the popularity. We've seen brands that have famously steered away from it. Cannondale springs to mind. They were the one that brought us this press fit madness with BB30, PF30, asymmetric PF30, and now Cannondale are actually famously going back to BSA. And I think that's because of bike reviewers. If you go through the pages of Bike Radar, you will find that their reviewers are always very favourable to a bike that has a BSA bottom bracket. And those reviewers influence the designers. They want their bikes to sell, and if they say it's a big thumbs up because it has a BSA bottom bracket, that's probably a people pleaser. The problem is that the argument for it doesn't stack up in my mind, because their argument for it is BSA is easy to maintain. And I'm like, how do you come up with that idea? Because let's just take a look at the amount of tools that you need. Now, just assuming that you're not going to invest in facing and cutting tools and you're just going to be a home mechanic. So far I've shown you 3 tools just for removing a square taper type design, but we have got 3 different tools here for just doing the different cups. This is the standard Dior one that also fits GXP ones and also fits on a massive variety of bottom brackets. Then you have the new Shimano ones which fits on like Ultegra, XT, etc. And then you have one that will fit Dura Ace and XTR. There's at least 3 just in the most popular. And if you go off brand into Rotor and whatever, you'll probably find many more examples. In fact, here's a small collection. This is Hope. I've got their own tool. I don't even remember what that's for, but there we go. Praxis have got their own one. Wheels Manufacturing have got their own one. And we've got a whole room upstairs full of various bits of bottom bracket tools that I brought over the years. So the sheer amount of tooling required just to fasten them and undo them is absolutely insane. The other thing that you've got to do with that is that they do need fairly regular maintenance, because especially on metal frames is that they rust, and you're going to have an aluminium against a steel or an aluminium frame, and those threads do corrode. And when they do, have quite a few little problems associated with that. One is you can't necessarily get the tightening torque to make sure your bottom bracket is tight, but also depends on a really flat interface between the frame and this edge here. And when this is all rusty and corroded and the paint's all flaked off, you just can't get that nice flat interface, which is why here in bike shops for decades and decades and decades we have had tools like this which will cut an absolutely nice straight line so that these can sit squarely, and we'd have chasing tools so that we can go in there and clean all the threads out and make sure the threads all run cleanly. Carbon fibre came along and wanted to maintain our threaded bottom bracket, so we started to essentially glue in sections like this, so the frame would be made essentially a press fit, and then we'd bond in these big chunks of aluminium. Okay, that's great. Now we've all seen these fail and have to be rebonded back in, but then in our drive to try and make things even lighter, this little chunk of aluminium was deemed too heavy, and now what we're seeing is these threads becoming thinner and thinner and thinner, and this center section being machined off, so we now just have 2 independent rings. Now, if you look at your nobility of materials chart, you'll see that as soon as you put aluminium next to carbon, you're inviting galvanic corrosion. You've got the anode and the cathode, and you'll see that little white sort of powdery corrosion that happens. For those of you that remember the early days of carbon when we had aluminium lugs and carbon tubes, and you'll see all the paint sort of bubbling up. Another popular place is where you saw the little dropout lugs bonded to the carbon fork, popular place for corrosion. Same thing is happening in your bottom bracket. And our channel's full of examples where that bonding has failed. So essentially, in our drive for I want a BSA bottom bracket, we've created another point of failure and the need for even more tools. So with all that in mind, what is the solution, or what's my opinion on how the industry should move forward? Because I really don't think that our footsteps back into the realm of BSA is the right way forward. You see, if we really do want these wider tyres that we're all kind of thirsty for, we can't just keep going back to this. Also, we can't just keep making this wider and wider, because we add bearings and then your Q factor gets wider and wider, something that we seem to have forgotten in recent days with things like UDH. I'm not asking for the BSA bottom bracket to die, I just think it needs to be used in the appropriate places. City, trekking bikes, absolutely the easiest and best thing to use when you don't have to worry about where the bearings sit. On performance race bikes, I definitely think we should be looking at a press fit bottom bracket. Why are we adding weight like this when we can just be putting a 45-gram plastic bottom bracket into our frames and saving all of that weight that we were trying to save in the first place? And I think on mountain bikes, this tube needs to be the big T47 properly bonded in, rather than just 2 independent threads. From my point of view, I think the next scandal that's going to hit the industry is probably the debonding of all these skinny little aluminium threads. Top tips of how to make sure your bottom bracket stays attached to your frame. 1, regular maintenance. Don't let that galvanic corrosion take effect. You're going to have to get your bottom brackets out fairly regularly. 2 is use a really good grease. Don't try and introduce another metal like copper or nickel. Use something like calcium sulfonate grease, something like that. Something that's quite waterproof. A good waterproof grease is good to use. There's a whole bunch of stuff that we've recommended on the channel before, and get that regular maintenance going. Other thing is to make sure your threads are clean. So when you are installing your bottom bracket, you should be able to install the entire thing by hand. This one's got a rubber seal on the inside, which is why it's tough. If you can't do that, then you need to go into a bike shop and get your threads cleaned out, because you need to make sure that when you're tightening this, you're using actual tightening torque, not using your torque wrench to overcome friction. Second thing is try and look for a good waterproof bottom bracket. The Shimano units are really, really well sealed, offer fantastic value for money. If you really want to go something a bit better, then we're fans of the Piccone bottom brackets. You can see O-ring sealed here on the inside, O-ring sealed here. It's probably about the best sealed bottom brackets that we've come across. Or you go for something like a stainless steel. That's only going to protect the bearing. You still need to make sure you get out and maintain the interface between threads and your frame. If for whatever reason you can't get to a bike shop and you've noticed that your facings are all torn up and not flat, you can just rely on thread lock, but it is definitely more of a bodge, and the best thing to do is try and get those faces completely flush. Also, pay attention to the diameter. So you'll find that the diameter here needs to make sure you've got a flush fit, and a lot of frames we're finding haven't been completely faced to the full diameter of a more premium bottom bracket. So you can see the diameter of the face that will be interfacing with your frame is significantly different. And if we get a Dura Ace one on there, so these ones are normally 41 millimeters, these are normally something like 44. So make sure that this face isn't just touching paint. So key points to remember: 1, don't let your bearing seize. 2, don't let your threads corrode. And if they do, go and get them sorted properly by a bike shop with the right tools. And yeah, keep a nice collection of tools. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Get into the comments. Did you learn something? If so, what was it? Did I miss something in this video that you want to add for everyone else to read? Get it down there in the comments. I'm really looking forward to reading what you have to say. Thanks.